Good afternoon. Today, as always, we start the review of events that took place on January 9th. Let's start with the news about the counteroffensive that Zelensky wanted to conduct back in 2022, but the U.S. was against it. The plan was the same as a year later: to break through the Zaporizhia region to Crimea and break the Russian land corridor to isolate Russian troops on the peninsula, but before the Russian Federation built defense lines there. This idea is called bold and even risky, but in the end it was never realized. It was voiced to Western partners by Zelensky and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. At that time, the commander-in-chief did not ask the U.S. for armored vehicles, but only 90 additional howitzers and artillery ammunition. But at the time of planning, Ukraine had not yet demonstrated offensive capabilities, and U.S. officials were opposed to Zelensky's plan. There were concerns that an advance from Berdyansk to Melitopol and down to the Sea of Azov could create vulnerabilities on the front lines, especially given the uncertainty about whether Ukraine could coordinate brigades for an effective offensive. From the U.S. perspective, failure was likely and its consequences potentially catastrophic, up to and including the capture of Zaporizhia and the Dnieper, and then Washington insisted that it needed to focus its forces on liberating Kherson, as the source says, because the AFU lacked trained personnel and equipment. We thought that if they bit off more than they could chew in the south, they would just be crushed. Trofimov's Pentagon interlocutor said. Zelensky disagreed and replied to the Americans that Ukraine should attack where it should, not where it can, but since the U.S. controlled most of the military aid to Ukraine, there was nothing to argue about, and a bet was placed on Kherson. In other interesting news, the White House discussed with U.S. defense companies the production of weapons for Ukraine. The Bloomberg agency specifies with reference to representatives of the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden that the participants of the meeting discussed how Washington could provide Ukraine with additional military aid. In particular, they discussed demining technologies, drones and systems to combat Russian drones. Reuters adds that the White House is trying to expand Ukraine's access to the most advanced U.S. technologies. Meanwhile, U.S. officials told Bloomberg that the companies represented at the meeting are already working directly with the Ukrainian government. During the day, 64 military clashes took place. In total, the enemy launched 1 missile and 29 airstrikes and 17 shellings from multiple rocket launchers on the positions of our troops and settlements. As a result of Russian terrorist attacks, unfortunately, there are dead and wounded among the civilian population. About 60 settlements were subjected to enemy artillery and mortar shelling. The aviation of the defense forces struck 9 areas of concentration of enemy personnel. A possible war over Taiwan will cost the world economy 10% of GDP, or about $10 trillion. Such a forecast is given by Bloomberg. The publication writes that this eclipses the impact of the war in Ukraine, the COVID pandemic, and the global financial crisis. So even those most dissatisfied with the status quo have reasons not to risk starting such a war. Although Bloomberg believes the conditions for a crisis exist, the growing economic and military weight of China, Taiwan's growing sense of national identity, and the uneasy relationship between Beijing and Washington, and a potential hot spot will be Taiwan's Jan. 13 election, in which relations with China are key for the main candidates. Back to Ukraine. 1,025 localities have been de-energized due to bad weather, most of all blackouts in Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kirovograd regions. This is reported by the Ministry of Energy. Mykolaiv said that on the power lines sometimes there is a layer of ice more than 5 centimeters. It is noted that this is a dangerous phenomenon, leading to a large number of damages. For a month of Polish border blocking, Ukraine lost on exports and imports of $860 million. This is reported in the January Macroeconomic and Monetary Review of the National Bank of Ukraine, most of all on deliveries by road processed food products, wood, industrial products. The negative effect of the blockade was leveled due to the intensification of food and MMC products deliveries by sea route, due to the gradual resumption of shipping to Ukrainian ports after Russia's withdrawal from the grain deal. Due to this, total export volumes grew. The West names division among the main risks for Ukraine in 2024. This forecast was published by the American weekly magazine The Time. In the ranking of the top 10 most important risks of the next year, the third item is divided Ukraine. According to the publication, Ukraine will remain de facto divided this year, and now Russia has the initiative on the battlefield and a material advantage. The publication writes that 2024 is a turning point in the conflict, if Ukraine does not soon solve its manpower problems, increase weapons production, and develop a realistic military strategy. Its territorial losses could be permanent and possibly expand. The Time also believes that Kiev will take more military risks this year, including strikes on more targets on Russian territory that would provoke an unprecedented Kremlin response and could draw NATO into the conflict. Following the Russian shelling, air quality in Kiev has deteriorated significantly due to high concentrations of combustion products, chemicals, and dust. A rough estimate of the environmental damage exceeded €56 billion, according to the Minister of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources Ruslan Strelts. More than 5,000 tons of CO2 have fallen into the atmosphere. Strelts noted that inspectors continue to record the damage that Russian occupiers inflict on the Ukrainian. Closer to the evening, Biden said he was trying to force Israel to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. The U.S. president was speaking at a South Carolina church when voices of pro-Palestinian activists demanding a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip erupted from the auditorium. Biden tried to calm the activists, but it did not help. They had to be escorted out of the hall. When the protesters were taken out and the chanting in support of Biden subsided, the U.S. president made his statement, "I have worked quietly with the Israeli government to get them to significantly reduce their presence and withdraw from the Gaza Strip," he said. The Ukrainian Air Force confirmed that the AFU does have a shortage of anti-aircraft guided missiles. This was stated by the Speaker of the Air Force Yuri Ignat, commenting on the New York Times article that the United States will soon be unable to supply Ukraine with missiles for Patriot. The deficit of anti-aircraft guided missiles is clear that there is. No one hides it. That's why such concerns appear in the Western press. I think Western partners are well informed about the state of affairs with our air defense means, Yuri Ignat said on the air of the telethon. He also said that the AFU spent a lot of missiles to repel the last 3 massive Russian attacks on December 29, January 2 and 8. The Russian Federation decided to evacuate children from Belgorod region because of the increased shelling, because the parents' anxiety is quite high. This was reported by the governor of the region Vyacheslav Gladkov. Children will be received in Voronezh, Yaroslavl, Kaluga, Tambov, Lipetsk, Tula and Penza regions, judging by Gladkov's words. The option of temporarily settling children in camps is being considered for now. If necessary, we will send our teachers and teachers who will accompany and be during all 3 weeks of the camp shift with our children, he writes. Also in Belgorod reduced the opening hours of shopping centers. Now they will be closed at 2000 hours. Thanks to all who watched this video. If you want to stay up to date and get the latest news, then subscribe to our channel and click on the bell to not miss new releases.